I'm a big fan of not really pitching, but listening. When people give me an objection, they may not be giving me an honest objection. They may be telling me, I don't have time, get out of my hair. And so it's really important to interpret what they're saying as whether is it really what they're saying or are they really intending something else? And the easy way to get around that is just to ask them what's important to them.
Welcome back to First Bunny Stories. Today I'm joined by Olin founder of Trilite Defense. In this conversation, we break down how he went from idea to getting his first paying clients in one of the most high stake industries out there relating to cyber threat. Olin, welcome. Tell us about yourself and what the business does.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Olin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Trilite Defense. We are a Dutch cybersecurity company. You can think of us as the Blackwater of cyber. What makes us different is our team are Ukrainian cyber operatives who have spent the better part of the past 10 years fighting Russian, North Korean, and other state-sponsored cyber attacks. We defend against cyber attacks from state-sponsored actors, and our team comes from Ukraine, where they have spent the better part of the entire Ukrainian war defending Ukraine from Russia, and to a lesser extent, North Korea, Iran, and China.
Great. That is a very interesting business. So, seeing your background, you've done multiple ventures. And you've had a successful track record leading up to this. What were you doing before Trilite?
Well, I'm old as dirt, right? I'm 60 years old. So this is my ninth startup, at least the ninth that I'll admit to. And there's probably been a lot more than nine. So I started my first company in 1989, and that was very successful. And I thought that starting companies was easy. At 28 years of age, I retired and thought I wouldn't have to go back to work and successfully burned through all the money I made on failed startups. So fast forward 30 years later, 35 years later, I was retired. I had been doing some investing, board work, consulting work, and really spending a lot of time skiing. And my very best friend from when I was 10 years old shows up at my house in Switzerland and said, hey, I want to sell my company. Can you help me? And in the process of selling his cyber company, learned a lot about how cyber security had changed since the last time I worked in it, which was 15 years ago for a US government agency. And I thought, wow, what is really missing is highly skilled operators to defend Europe from the onslaught of what are called advanced persistent threats. So there's lots of different cybersecurity problems. And in fact, most people don't realize how big cybercrime is globally. Do you have any idea?
I don't. The depth of it, I'm not aware of.
So the global economy is about 120 trillion a year. The lowest estimate for cybercrime is 1.2 trillion. The highest estimate I've seen is over 10 trillion. So cybercrime is something like the size of the German economy. So it's vast. And the most dangerous threats are from intelligence agencies that use cyber attacks as a way of projecting their national interests. And we are seeing an explosion of that given the war in Iran and the war in Ukraine. Now, my business partner, Patrick, had been working with the Ukrainian cyber operatives for a long time and told me how skilled they were. And this is a business of very high trust. So I actually went to Ukraine to meet these guys. And I was truly surprised at how different Ukrainians think about things than Americans. And so we started the very long journey about a year and a half ago of starting this company. We spent about a year preparing. We formed the company, and within 48 hours of forming the company, we signed our first contract.
Wow. So, you've said that you've done 9 ventures in the past. You've had this long journey. What was that like to adjust to a different country? Was it easily transferable to adapt to that, or did you personally find some challenges?
My first international business was back in the mid-90s. I started an offshore development shop in Thailand and also tried to get into the sports apparel business in Thailand. And so I've had international work experience for the better part. Every business these days is international. My last company, Rev, we had 50 different countries as customers with more than 500 enterprise customers. So I don't think anyone that's really starting a serious business right now can think about only being in one domain or one country. A lot of American companies think that way. And I think that one of the reasons I see businesses that I've been a part of that have failed is not thinking big enough, not thinking globally. So we need to have a vision of how we're going to change the way people address a problem. And we know we're on the right problem if that problem exists everywhere. And so I really think that when you're starting a business, the most important thing is vision, values, and culture. And that vision is something that is actually really hard to find people with big visions. There's a lot of people that have ideas for a business and they optimize for a very small set of problems as opposed to thinking bigger.
That makes a lot of sense. There are so many opportunities out there. How do you deal with that? Because I'm sure you've seen opportunities increase tenfold over the years.
Well, what back in the days when we wore suits and sport coats, on the inside label, I'd always have embroidered my motto, which is focus wins. There's no such thing as multitasking well, right? Focus wins in every sport, every business. The people that are the most focused are going to have the most traction or are going to be able to get the most progress on execution. And I think that the challenge is asking what to focus on, because when you're starting a business, there's lots of things that will go wrong. There's lots of different problems that you have to solve. Some of them are very important because they generate revenue. Other things are really important because they're a regulatory requirement. You have no choice, but you have to do it. So the discipline of managing time is the answer. And the discipline of knowing what your superpower is, what your motivations are, and what your weaknesses are, and being able to delegate or partner with people and make sure that I'm not putting myself into an echo chamber where everyone's telling me what a great job I'm doing. I want to make sure that I am challenged in a way that makes me a better manager and better leader and better person. And we look for that in our team. So I think that Jeff Bezos said it really well, that he looks for people with very strong convictions that are easily changed in the face of new data. So I think that what's really important changes from moment to moment, but that vision of knowing how you are changing the way the world addresses a problem helps organize thoughts into, is this taking us to a new way? And a lot of companies, when you ask them, what problem do you solve? You don't get very clear answers, right? The problem that Trilight Defense solves is we help companies understand how to maintain operations while they're under a nation-state cyber attack. Pretty easy to understand. Can you continue operating as a business when the Russian intelligence services decide to shut your network down? And the only way we think to get there is through simulations. And the difference between our simulations and the simulations you can buy from, say, Mondiant or Unit 42 is our guys are fighting a hot war. Those guys are studying what our guys do.
Focus, knowing what the problem is, and knowing what your solution is. It's very clear, very easy to digest. And clearly that philosophy got you to land your first contract pretty quickly. For someone that's never done this before, what did day one look like?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm trying to think of how do we measure what's day one? Because there's this whole gray zone. Am I going to do this? Am I not going to do this? And that, it's not like you cross over from white to black and suddenly you're in the business, right? I guess that happens when you sign the legal agreements, you've wired the money into the new bank account, you paid the lawyers. At that point, we're pretty committed, right? There's real money involved. And I would say that happened probably about a year after we started working on this process. So that was pretty far along. Kind of the first thing that I wanted to make sure is we were starting a business that actually solved a problem that was really important, and there were not sufficiently good solutions already in the marketplace. And I hesitate to say that because I have a great deal of respect and fear of the cyber community. The threats are really scary, and there's a lot of really, really smart people in this business. And so to try to find a white space, to find something that isn't crowded already is pretty damn hard. And so when we looked at the low end of the market, like the penetration testing or that type of thing, there's a lot of really good people, a lot of people doing it. But when you look at the other end of the spectrum of who is the scariest actors in the world, are definitely the militaries and intelligence services. They have virtually unlimited resources, oftentimes hire the smartest people in their respective countries. In the case of North Korea, it's the largest industry in the country is cybercrime. That space, there's some very good Israeli companies. There's a couple of really good companies out of Western Europe. Certainly the United States is in a little different position because legally the United States has some things that put the United States at a disadvantage to provide cybersecurity services in international markets. And one of the things that I really thought long and hard about is what's happening between the US and relations with the rest of the world. And they're not good. And so you see a great deal of movement in Europe towards what's called digital sovereignty. For example, the German government banned the use of Microsoft and canceled the Microsoft subscriptions because they do not want to be dependent on US technology. And it's also part of the overall trade war, these type of things. And I'm distinctly apolitical. That's why we're in Switzerland, is we take a very clear stand. We stand with Western democracies. We stand with Ukraine, but we do not stand with political parties in the United States on either the left or the right. And certainly when we look at Europe, we want to work with all of Western Europe and the democratic economies of the rest of the world. And so that digital sovereignty is one light. Tri-light is three lights. The second light is that when you look at that high end, the most threatening part of cybersecurity, the first thing everyone thinks about is AI. One of the interesting things that's happening right now is this recording is being done. A lot of attention is being paid to Anthropic's new model, Mythos, which is amazing at how many vulnerabilities it's finding that have been hiding in plain sight. And a lot of people think AI is going to be this magical bullet that is going to somehow defend us from everything, or it's this dystopian future that puts all of us at risk. In reality, a little bit of both is true. AI is the great accelerant, but what it has basically done is democratize the ability for anyone to wage a cyber attack. The cyber attacks that were being done by some of the famous Russian units such as Sandworm or APT-29 back in the year 2020, I saw one study where they can now be done for about $8 in tokens using ChatGPT. So something like 80+% of the known vulnerabilities can be executed with a large language model. So that pretty much makes everybody a potential hacker. Fortunately, most people will never go down that path. But we saw the explosion of threats coming from AI as the second light for this opportunity. And so the third light, which is the most important light, is where are the best cyber operatives in the world right now? It's with a country that is outmanned on the battlefield 6-1, fighting a country with an economy 12 times larger than its own and maintaining its defenses. I mean, when Russia invaded Ukraine, I think none of us really expected them to last more than a week. And here we are more than 4 years later. And it's pretty apparent the tide of the war has changed. Ukraine is more than defending itself, is taking the fight into Russia. Cyber warfare is a big part of that story. Right? Everyone focuses on the drones, which are incredible. The transformation of warfare through drone warfare is in and of itself quite remarkable. But think about, for those drones to be effective, you have to have effective intelligence. You need to have really good cyber infrastructure. You need to be able to have great communications. And this is where I think Ukraine is truly the best in the world.
It's a lot to navigate. I can understand what needs to be addressed carefully as you approach it. One question that comes to mind is, because of the politics involved with this, the intelligence that's involved, did you have any initial marketing plans in place?
Well, there's different definitions of marketing. Let's define marketing as generating demand, right? That people know we are, what we do, and they want to buy from us. And very early in every time I've started a business, particularly this time, is I'm not going to talk to myself about the opportunity. I'm going to go out and have a theory of who is my ideal customer and go talk to them. So in this case, I went out and talked to chief financial officers that I know and got time with them and said, what do you worry about with respect to cybersecurity? And everyone said the same thing, is I've hired the right people. I spend tens of millions of dollars a year protecting my enterprise. I get a report to the board of directors every quarter that tells me that we're compliant and that we've got things in place. And nothing's happened yet that I know about. How do I know if we're doing a good job? How do I know we just didn't get lucky? How do I measure the return on investment on something that has never happened? And when I heard that, I'm like, oh my God, boards of directors need to have confidence that they've actually invested into something that's working. And that CFO goes through an audit. Every year they go through an audit. And an external auditor will sign off and say, we got good accounting practices, blah, 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 blah. CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, don't have that. They get the compliance, they get the certification of a pen test. But to actually systematically test the entire system against a threat, that's called red teaming. And the people that are doing that are doing it from a perspective where they are not doing it from the front lines. There are good companies that do it, but are they bringing the experience of actually fighting a war? There's some things you learn in war that you just don't learn anywhere else. And that was the gap that we saw. And we have a couple really big reference customers, one of the world's largest chemical manufacturers, one of the world's largest mobile communications companies, as early customers that will say, yep, these guys did a great job for us. And when you're starting a business, one of the most important things is to think about, who am I solving the problem for? How are they going to measure my success in solving it? And am I going to be able to talk about this success with other people? And that's the beginning of marketing, because the first few, I tell you, the easiest sale in the world is your first sale. That's easy. What's really hard is around number 20, 25, 30, because you're starting to scale up. You're getting multiple customers. You think the first one's hard? Try to jump over so-called the chasm, where you're going from those early adopters that think you're great into a majority of the market. That's a hard jump to make. And I'm referencing a book called Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore that was written 30 years ago, and it still applies today as much as it did on the first day it was published.
A lot of interesting factors there. One thing that came to mind is when you spoke to your first contractor client, given the factors that you've brought up, how did you have them trust you enough to let you create these simulations?
Yeah, so the question is, what is trust, and how do you create a currency of trust where people are trusting you and willing to try you out, so to speak? I think the definition of trust is really interesting. It's one that in our last company, we borrowed something that I don't know where we found it, but the idea was have a mathematical model of trust. The way you have a FICO score for your credit risk. Well, here's a way of calculating a trust score. Let's score everybody on a 0 to 10 on, do you do what you say you're going to do? 0, never. 10, all the time. So do you do what you say you're going to do? Do you have the capability of doing it? In other words, are you committing to something you're actually skillful at? So doing it's one thing, being good at it is another, 0 to 10. Lastly, do you treat things with competence? In other words, if I tell you this is a secret, do you keep your mouth shut? 10. Or do you tell everybody? 0. So if you multiply those three things, I do what I say, 10. I'm really good at it, 10. And I can keep things in confidence, 10. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. So that's your numerator, right? So that sounds great. Now you have to look at what is a more interesting question of trust, and that's motivation. And I think it boils down to, are you self-motivated or are you motivated for others? So let's call that self-interest, and let's put that in the denominator, 0 to 10. If I'm entirely self-interested and I'm only working for myself, the score is not 1,000. It's 1,000 divided by 10. It's 100. I would say that 0 in the denominator means you're not human, because everybody has a little bit of self-interest. So the optimal score is 1. And if someone feels that they don't have any self-interest, I don't trust them.
So in that first pitch, what was the response to that? Did they feel that, okay, like, let's do this? Or if they had objections, was it more because maybe they had timelines they had to work through, maybe projects, things of that nature? Did they have reasonable objections?
So I'm a big fan of not really pitching, but listening. So when people show up and throw up their idea, the way I handle pitches is really to ask them, how do they think about cybersecurity? Have you had any cyber incidents? And what you're listening for is someone that denies having a cyber incident. That's not reality. Everyone's had a cyber incident. They just may not know about it. And if they say, I don't know, boy, now we're starting to be real, right? So I think one thing that's very important is to realize when people give me an objection, they may not be giving me an honest objection. Right? For instance, they may be telling me, I don't have time, get out of my hair, or I don't really think of you as a cyber guy, so go away. And so it's really important to interpret what they're saying as whether is it really what they're saying, or are they really intending something else? And the easy way to get around that is just to ask them what's important to them. What are they losing sleep over with respect to what I'm interested in? And the cyber is one of those things that if you're not thinking about it, you're professionally incompetent. So everybody's thinking about it because it's such a vast problem. What's interesting is the way people talk about it in Europe and the way they talk about it in the United States is very different. Europe has much stricter disclosure rules. So you'll see a lot more disclosures of a cyber incident in Europe, where in the United States, it's so embarrassing, a lot of people just won't report it or hide it. So oftentimes what I'll hear is people say, well, our near peer breaches, the ones that have happened to other people that are just like us, they always seem to happen in Europe. Yeah, well, that's because they're reporting and your US competitors are not. Does that mean it's not happening? Of course not. Come on. These hackers are very smart people. And that's one of the reasons why I'm attracted to it is that it's fun to work with smart people. And generally the people that are thinking about cyber are pretty sharp people. So it's a fun space to be in because it's highly competitive. It's absolutely critical. And it's a little bit scary to think, oh, we're going to offer something new. My angle is it's not me offering anything new. I'm just fortunate enough to be a part of a team that we pulled together the people that are veterans of fighting maybe the most sophisticated cyber war in history. It's really not about me. It's about the team. And it's not my idea. That would be absurd to even claim any credit for it. I was brought in because I have a lot of experience in productizing AI. I am known as a guy that's a growth CEO, and I had the right relationships on day one. It's not because I had this grand vision or I somehow figured out some new way of doing science. That would be preposterous for me. I can't even say it with a straight face. Rather, I knew and love and have worked with Patrick for a long time. We were best friends since we were 10 years old. So there's trust. Patrick had worked with the Ukrainians for a very long time. So there was trust. The people that have joined us since then, everybody that joins our company has known somebody for at least 10 years. So there's nobody brand new. And when we go out and talk to people, the first people we talk to have known one of our team for a long time. So we're starting with a place we know where you're coming from and we're trustworthy. As we grow and we start talking to people that we don't know, that's the interesting question of how do we build trust there? For instance, today I met with a private equity fund manager and I asked him, okay, you guys buy and sell companies. How do you know you're not buying a company that has already been compromised, that has been breached? There's a long dwell. So it's funny you bring that up. That just happened to us. And he told me the story of them buying a company. And as soon as the press release went out, the ransom hit. So the ransomware had been in there the whole time. The attacker was following this particular private equity group. They knew what space they were in. They breached one of their target companies. They stayed and they waited. And as soon as the press release, boom, they hit them for the ransom. That's a real vexing problem. And sure, you guys did cyber due diligence, but the people that were doing your cyber due diligence had never seen that attack before. So how could they possibly defend against it?
Do you think people react more proactively saying, I need a solution to this before anything happens? Or do they have a realization of I need this after an attack occurs?
There's a distribution of adoption. These distributions seem to always follow the same shape. They're a bell curve. There are the people that are extremely proactive and want to make sure they prevent something before it happens. And then there are people on the other end of that that say, I'm not going to do anything until something happens to me. More commonly, for instance, in one industry that I've worked a lot in the United States in energy production, I talk to people and they say, we're going to worry about that when we see it happening. Well, the reality is it's already happening. You just don't see it, right? Colonial Pipeline, I would have thought when that got shut down would get everybody's attention that we really need to pay attention to this. And it did for the big operators. But for the smaller operators, a lot of them are like, whew, that's expensive. Not sure we want to spend the money on that. We're too small to be a target. And then you hear the stories from the private equity story I just told you is that it was a small company that was the target and it was a long dwell. It was just a very clever and smart hacker that did it. In that case, we have not been retained, so we've not done our work to tell who it was, but I have a guess of who may have been the hacker. And it's one of these groups that are pretty clever. They're pretty hard to find. And in that case, that private equity fund was using one of the big consultancies that's kind of a household name.
How do you find a consistent way of getting more clients? Once you've gotten the
Okay.
first few, what have you found out works? when you scale to get more clients and what does not work?
Right. How do you keep a healthy pipeline of new prospects that you can continually start to grow? This is a new venture, so we be arrogant and dishonest to say that we figured that out. In other companies, I certainly had figured that out. In fact, the last company, we were Inc. number 35 on the Inc. 5000. So we grew 7,900% in 3 years. We went from near zero to like 2.5 million a month run rate. So was that about 30 million a year? That's fast growth. And it comes down to one thing, people. It's not how, it's who. And that has to do with hiring. The way I think of this is the only skill I really need to have is to be a great recruiter, to be able to recruit and retain the right talent. There is no way a solo operator will ever be as good as a team. It's like being a sports team. You're only as good as the last couple plays you did, and you have to go out and win the championship every quarter. So building a pipeline involves having great demand gen engineering, being able to have great outreach that actually adds value to the prospect, that you're giving more than you're asking, that you're helping them get through a problem even before they become a customer. And you have to think of it not about yourself, but think about it from the customer's perspective. And if they're busy and they don't have time, that's telling you something, that you're not important and that you're taking time as opposed to creating time from them. But for me, I always think about why, what, how. And in this case, you can replace it with why, who, how. In other words, don't ask me how I build a pipeline. Ask me who I've got building it and why are they doing it, right? And that big why is what I think really differentiates fast growth companies from non-fast growth companies, is to be able to have a conversation with a customer about why you help them with their business as opposed to how you solve a specific problem.
Feeling between comparing when you first start on day one, when you open up your laptop, you open up Word document, you just type in the name of the business, to the point where you're generating clients. That is a journey, right? Because you're going from completely zero to something is happening. How does that feel from your perspective when you see that you're getting this traction, you're creating that trust? What goes through your mind? Because in entrepreneurship, it's not for everyone. And because it's not for everyone, not everyone reaches that level.
If you're doing it well, getting traction doesn't feel good. You know, when I go to the gym and I lift really heavy weights, it doesn't feel good. It hurts. And that's the way growing a business feels. If you can be happy working for somebody else, don't be an entrepreneur, because it's a lot easier to have a steady paycheck, a 401k plan, and 4 weeks of vacation working at Qualcomm than it is to actually go out and start a business. It's an awful experience to start a business. I think that being an entrepreneur is a personality disorder that is directed energy into starting a business. One of the telling experiences I had years ago, a friend of mine who was a politician asked a bunch of entrepreneurs to go down to the maximum security state prison and meet with the prisoners that were going to their parole boards to get ready to be released and so forth, or they were interviewing to be released. I'm not a lawyer. I don't understand the whole process. But what was amazing is that experience. They put us into, it was the Concorin State Prison, which is south of San Diego. And we went to Cell Block C, which is where all of the really tough people go. These were people that had spent decades in prison. One guy had spent more than a decade in solitary confinement. So not exactly who you normally run into in a business meeting. And what was interesting is we spent the day together and we went through a lot of structured conversations. And one of the things that was remarkable is how similar our childhoods were. A lot of entrepreneurs come from broken families. A lot of entrepreneurs come from places where they have a chip on their shoulder and they want to prove things. A lot of entrepreneurs go into it because they are screw the man type. I don't want to be part of the system. I want to break the system, that kind of thing, the iconoclastic mentality. And certainly at 60 years old, I'm very different than I was at 25 years old. But the one thing that's similar is that my tolerance for bullshit is near zero. And when I hear ridiculous bureaucratic bullshit, I just don't do well with it. And so that's when you work at a place like Qualcomm, there's a lot of bullshit, right? it's a big company. They've got rules. There's reasons why it's structured the way it is. And you got to kind of fit into there. And this is your box. Go in this box and do that. As an entrepreneur, those people rebel against that. And that rebellious, defiant nature is very similar between entrepreneurs and guys that are spending their life in prison for doing really bad things. And I thought that was a big insight for me is that entrepreneurship is really not all it's cracked up to be. Maybe we should spend a lot less time celebrating entrepreneurs and more time thinking about how we can be of service to each other, and maybe spend more time thinking about how we can be better people as entrepreneurs. What can we do to make the world a better place as opposed to just make ourselves richer? And I think that I'm not alone in that. I think there's a lot of other entrepreneurs that I know that kind of feel that way as well. And I think entrepreneurship can be a way of promoting social good. And I think we live in a world right now where we very much need people to think about and do things to make the world a better place.
Yeah, it's like with great power comes with great responsibility, just to quote Spider-Man there.
Yeah.
I think it's fair. I mean,
Was that Spider-Man?
yeah, I completely agree. You should do good, give good. Everyone has their battles, and life's not easy. So you can always help someone. Why not? And I think that should be the
Yeah.
essence of
Everybody's got a
entrepreneurship.
problem.
Yeah, exactly. Entrepreneurship is if you have a problem, you should solve it and do it in the right manner. Given the personality types you're thinking about entrepreneurship and how to deliver for people and make it a good community, there's AI tools out there, right? Like that can accelerate yourself. Which AI tools have you found the most productive for you?
So my graduate work was in AI. I've been in the AI industry for 20 plus years. I've been in it so long that when AI worked, we had a technical term for it. We called it software because it solved a problem. And when the AI didn't work, we went and raised more venture capital. I spent a lot of time raising capital. So I am a so-called AI native. I've been part of teams that have filed 18 patents on large language models. We have subscriptions to all of the major AI platforms. The one that I use the most is Claude. I really like Claude's controls and Anthropic's. I like constitutional AI. I think that that's a really important thing for AI to have a constitution and for it to be controllable. I am acutely aware that LLMs in particular are very good at pattern recognition, but absolutely awful at de novo. They're not good at discovering unique things. They'll never discover something they've never seen before. The process of always having to have an answer, even if it's wrong, leads to hallucinations that are oftentimes so subtle and oftentimes made so confidently that they are accepted. And if we accept one hallucination that's very subtle and we accept another one that's very subtle, and before long, we've accepted enough hallucinations that we no longer are based in reality. And I see this a lot with people that are over dependent upon the LLM, that they have forfeited their responsibility for critical thought and reasoning and say, okay, I'm just going to have the AI do everything. I think that's a recipe for disaster. And we know what that movie looks like. We've seen it. What happened when social media came around is an entire generation lost social skills. So what are we going to lose from artificial intelligence? So I think that AI is a permanent and essential part of all of our lives. I really like the way Jack Dorsey has been talking about it. I think, organizations are fundamentally learning and communications enterprises. How fast do we learn? How well do we communicate? And AI enables us to learn and communicate exponentially faster. It allows us to take very hierarchical organizations and make them very flat and accelerate rapidly. This is what Ukraine has done. If you look at the Ukraine defense industry, they're going from prototype to fielding in less than a month. Do you have any idea how long it took the U.S. Army to select a new pistol? 20 years. And they selected a pistol they could have bought at your local Walmart 20 years ago. So the amount of bullshit and bureaucracy and things that stifle innovation are abound with these really deep, thick $20,000 hammer from the U.S. Department of Defense. Does not exist in Ukraine, right? They have other problems in Ukraine, and they're addressing those. I think no one's going to deny that Ukraine had a problem with or has a problem with corruption. but think about the cost of corruption versus the cost of a $20,000 hammer. I think that every country has problems, but I think what's really interesting is that AI accelerates both the good and the bad. And AI can be used to extend that hierarchy and make it there, or they can flatten it. Sequoia has a very good YouTube channel, and Jack Dorsey gave an interview where he said, companies as a artificial general intelligence, or every company could be an AGI. And I think that is the right way I think about it. Is I use AI to communicate more effectively, to recognize patterns, to deal with very large amounts of data. There's things that I'm definitely at least 5 to 10 times more productive because I use tools. In fact, I'm using one right now, which is quite interesting, where it's probably one everyone knows about. It's called Suma Chat, and it allows me to have different AI agents be adversarially challenging each other on an answer. So for instance, right now I'm writing a LinkedIn post, and I had my idea, and I said, this is the objective. This is who you are. It's for LinkedIn. This is the audience I'm going for. This is your objective. Here's what I did. Debate it. And I've got Opus 4.6, Gemini Flash, and ChatGPT 5.1 debating each other and coming up with a better version than what I did. AI is great for stuff like that.
You've gone on this journey with Trilite. Has it challenged a lot of your assumptions about cyberspace than you expected? Has it been more challenging than you thought?
Well, when I first got into it, and I'm very concerned about safety. It's very important to be safe and not make myself a target for my family or my friends and loved ones. So that was my first concern about cyber. I tend to be a pretty public person, and cyber people tend not to be, for a good reason. Now that we're in it, and I really recognize that working on behalf of corporations to make them stronger, the principal people that I work with are the good guys, right? We work with chief financial officers, chief operating officers, to a lesser degree, chief information security officers, the people that are interested in the strategic impact of cyber on their business. I do not know or work with any of the dark side people, right? We make sure that we have operational security. Operators are put in a place they are not known. And that's really important because they're actually in Ukraine. And guess what? I'm not in Ukraine. Right. Currently, I'm in the United States, and I will soon be in Switzerland. So the industry is a little different than what I expected, in the sense that I actually find it's very collaborative among companies like ours. Is that I've really run into some really great people in the industry. It's almost like the open source community when I was doing a lot of work around AI. You'd get some great collaborations. You'd meet people on GitHub of all places, and then you'd wind up developing a real relationship with them. And that's kind of like that in cyber. It's too early for me to pass judgment, and I certainly defer to my partners who have been working in it for decades. But yeah, I think that what's great about this industry is that it is needed. It's essential. It's one where coming into it with a healthy dose of respect for the opposition is really important. And don't do stupid shit. Right?
Any final pieces of advice that you want to part with the audience before we wrap up here?
If you have a choice, don't start a business. Go get a job if you can handle it. If you're going to start a business, understand that it is not for everybody, but boy, it's the only thing I can do. When I first retired years ago, I told my wife I wasn't going to start another business, and she kind of rolled her eyes, and she was right. I'm a dog that chases cars, and every dog that chases a car eventually winds up under the wheel. And the metaphor for me is I'm sure that I will be doing startups for at least a while longer. I mean, it is a lot different now doing it at 60 than it was when I was 23, the age of my first startup. But I think that what's really cool about your program and what you're asking for, the only thing that really matters is delighting customers. And that's measured by getting sales and how to get the first sale. If you don't remember anything else from my speech, the most important thing about the first sale is learning how to delight a customer. And those first few customers will come to you because they trust that you're going to break your back making it right and doing whatever it takes to make them happy. And that's the joy of this, is the learning how to overcome obstacles. It's one of those things where it's like being an athlete. You have to enjoy the training. You have to enjoy the pain.
Perfect. Well, Olin, thank you so much for a great conversation. I had a lot of fun, and it was great to learn so much about you and what you do. And links to Trilight Defense will be down below in the description. And stay tuned for the next interview.